I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm an active investor in the cleantech sector, and my work at Mars extends that. I work directly with cleantech startups, providing strategic advice and really trying to find and help nurture the next global leaders in the cleantech space. So I'm a hardcore finance guy. I built a software company, so I'm coming from this topic from that perspective. So it's reasonable to ask, why did I write this book? And when I watch the public debate about energy in this country and south of the border, it's a very poor debate. It's a false debate because in that debate there are a set of assumptions on either side. You know, let's go low carbon, let's not go low carbon. Both sides have some assumptions that are just plain false. So it's a very poor debate, and I got very frustrated watching that, and I'm trying to affect that public debate at the end of the day. That's kind of why I'm motivated. And those assumptions, I mean, one of the assumptions is, you know, clean energy is often viewed as kind of the kids' table at the fossil fuel party, right? And the fossil fuel party is a great party, right? I mean, that's why we have the economy we have. We shouldn't deny that. But it's often viewed as, you know, a lot of noise, a lot of fury, but not a lot of substance, right? If you really want to run the factories, you need fossil fuels. So we can dabble in clean energy, but if you ever really committed, the factories wouldn't hum and the lights would flicker. And there's a real fear about that, I think. Certainly at the federal level, that's an assumption. And that assumption is false. It is outright false. Obviously, there's going to be a transition. It doesn't happen in a day, but there's absolutely no question in my mind that within my lifetime, we can have an economy that is zero carbon. It's our choice to do that or not. There's a pressing need to do that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the assumption that we can't is just plain false, and it's frustrating to see that clean energy is not viewed as a substantive source of energy. I would argue it's actually a more stable and a more robust source of energy now than fossil fuels. The other assumption is that we have a lot of time. We can continue to talk about this issue for a while. We don't. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But most importantly, I think, even if people accept the need to do it and they accept that we could do it, it'll bankrupt us, right? That if we really commit to clean energy, it's expensive, it'll bankrupt us. And I would argue that the real economic risk lies in not responding quickly enough to this challenge. There are really two sort of pillars to that risk, and I'll talk about them. But I think the real danger on the horizon is not dealing with this problem quickly, both because there's economic opportunity to be had if we do it, but also because if we don't do it, there are enormous costs that are not yet understood by the general public, right? We are going down a blind alley on a very dark night with fossil fuels, and we need to turn around very quickly, and the public doesn't know that yet. So that's part of my motivation in doing this, but I approach this topic from the position of an entrepreneur with my eye on the dollar bill. Really, that's the language I speak. How do I move this forward? I guess whoops. Okay. So really, the structure of my argument is very simple. It is necessary and urgent that we kick the fossil fuel habit. There are reasons for that. It is non-negotiable that we do it, as a matter of fact. What am I doing here? There we go. But luckily for us, it's possible. Largely, we've invented what we need. The problem now is deploying it, right? So we've solved a lot of the technical problems, and we need to deploy this technology at scale. And that leads to why it's going to be very difficult, right? A lot of people who are on the side of moving to low carbon will understate the problem and understate the scale of the problems we face in doing this. It would be very difficult. The speed and scale at which we need to build this infrastructure is enormous. We have to replace an infrastructure that's taken a couple of lifetimes to build, and we have maybe 10 or 20 years to do it. The kind of capital we need to deploy is enormous. And so we may have solved the technical problems, but we have to solve the market problems. We need to shape the market, and we need to give the right signals for the private sector to step in and do what it does best, which is solve this problem. But it will be difficult simply because of the scale of it. And so why is it necessary and urgent? Well, Jeff Rubin will tell you it's peak oil. I certainly think there's a really good argument there. I'm not a geophysicist. I seem to think there's some intuitive validity to this argument. In my view, though, however, in the long term, it's a straw man. I mean, it will certainly create economic disruption. It's certainly nothing that we want to ignore. It's certainly reason alone to get off our duffs and begin to address the long-term infrastructure play that we need to address. But at the end of the day, it's not going to destroy our civilization. We've got lots of coal in the ground. We've got lots of bitumen we can melt. It's not really a game changer. It's a strong disruptive force. The game changer is climate change. And I'm not going to talk a long time about this because I want to get onto some solutions and some policy recommendations and some technologies. But not to put too fine a point on it, and people don't hear this often enough, climate change is our civilization's end game. If we do not get this right, It will destroy our way of life. It has a set of economic, political repercussions that we've never seen before. And it's not a future threat, right? It's here. It's wrecking the party now. It's in the kitchen stealing beer and wrecking furniture. By definition, global average temperatures are rising. That's climate change. It's here. It's not a theory about a future event. More importantly, global average ocean temperatures are rising. That's the big thermal battery. That's the one you want to keep your eye on. And its temperature is rising. If you want a taste of what this means, I mean, ask an Australian farmer what climate change means, right? It's been 10 to 12 years of a drought in Australia. Ask someone in the forestry industry in BC what climate change means. It's the pine beetle. Ask Lloyd's of London what it means. It's an exponential rise in insurance claims on extreme weather events. Ask Russians what happened this summer. Ask Pakistan what happened this summer. That is exactly what the models predict. That is exactly what's happening, and it is going to get a lot worse. There is an enormous gap between what the public thinks we know about climate change and what we know, and it is very bad. It is already happening, and it is bad enough that the kind of economic damage it will wreak swamps misdirection in moving into clean energy, right? The costs that it takes to switch to clean energy, there are costs. We can talk about them. We need to be honest about it. But it's nothing compared to the negative discount rate that will emerge if we let this thing run out of control. Negative discount rate just means future generations are poorer, right? We will not be able to feed the population if this continues, right? That's not hypothetical. It's beginning to happen. Deserts are moving north already. It's moved 4 degrees north already. So bread baskets to dust bowls is what we're talking about, and we need to be honest about it, and so we need to get on it. And if it seems alarmist, we've known this for a long time. This is not recent, right? President Johnson was warned in 1965 by his National Science Advisor. We still have that piece of paper. Everything that guy said is coming true. Had about 100 years, the Earth would become uninhabitable for most humans if we continued. That was 1965. This quote is from someone who addressed the UN General Assembly in 1989. Right? Single greatest threat facing civilization. That was Margaret Thatcher. No shill of the environment, she, right? So we've known about it for a long time, and I think, I'm going to end it here. But the point is, there is a line in the sand. This is non-negotiable. It is necessary and urgent. Now, out of this, of course, comes great opportunity. We're talking about rebuilding a massive piece of infrastructure. And we need smart policy to do it, and we need it for a number of reasons. First of all, we need to lower the risk of climate change, right? We've seen what happens when risk builds in a system. We just saw it in the financial system. You cannot ignore risk forever. You cannot keep pushing it off. You cannot keep externalizing it, right? That is exactly what is happening in our climate system. So risk is, the probability of an event happening multiplied by the consequences. So very low probability, very high consequences. Those are hard to plan for. Climate change is a near certainty, and the consequences are dire. So it's a risk that we need to mitigate. I mean, I'll end my diatribe on climate change there. But the point is, too, it creates global economic opportunities, right? It's not just a moral and environmental imperative. It's an economic imperative, and out of that imperative comes opportunity. This is the single largest market that the world has ever seen. Cisco and IBM, it's called the smart grid, just the smart grid infrastructure, the largest infrastructure play they've ever seen, swamping what the internet was to them. It's probably $40 to $50 trillion that it's going to get spent on our energy infrastructure in the next 30 to 40 years. We've never seen a market that big before. And countries will be buyers or sellers of technology. Cleantech is today what the silicon chip was in 1960, only multiplied several hundredfold. And the microchip created enormous wealth for Silicon Valley. That drove a big part of the American economy, and it still does today with their competitive advantage. That's what Cleantech is today. That's the market that we need to get on top of and stop being reactive to. If you buy Cleantech today, you buy it from Europe, right? Because they've been looking at this for 10 or 20 years. It's time for us to step up and enter this marketplace. And of course, we want to ensure long-term growth, right? High carbon growth is impossible. That's the negative discount rate that climate change will bring. That's economic talk for economic ruin. So long-term sustainable growth has to be low carbon, right? So there's immediate opportunities in selling technology. It's just good long-term economic policy to switch to low carbon. So that's what we need policy for. And I'll talk specifically about what some of those policy options might be for Canada and or for Alberta. But the scale of the opportunity, again, to sort of reinforce this, at Mars we work with startups. A lot of you are